Today's critique examines a submission exploring the legacy of Osman Hamdi Bey, positioning his artwork as a deliberate counter-narrative to Western Orientalism and a metaphor for Ottoman societal reform. And diving right into the feedback, the current narrative voice effectively captures attention but relies heavily on a colloquial, social media-style cadence that undermines its academic credibility for a university history assignment.
Yeah, that is the biggest hurdle right out of the gate. The primary weakness here is that the text utilizes these highly fragmented sentences, emojis like the little paint palette, and these rhetorical hooks.
Like that "what if I told you?"
Exactly. It reads like a script for a short-form video rather than a scholarly historical analysis. And, this pacing creates an engaging but ultimately superficial rhythm that prevents any deep analytical exploration.
Right, it's like reading a museum exhibit placard.
A placard?
Yeah, like it has that kind of placard energy where it just hooks the viewer who's walking past, right? But how does a student transition that placard energy into an actual academic essay?
So the suggestion here is to elevate that academic tone by synthesizing these fragmented, punchy thoughts into cohesive, complex sentences. You have to preserve the narrative momentum while actually meeting university-level standards of formal writing.
You can't just throw isolated statements at a professor.
Right. No, you need the architectural space of a full sentence. For a concrete example, instead of using that fragmented hook, what if I told you one of the most powerful painters, this is Osman Hamdi Bey, they should combine those ideas into a formal thesis statement.
Oh, so maybe something like, Osman Hamdi Bey emerges as a pivotal figure who bridged art, archaeology, and museum curation to actively construct a modern Ottoman identity.
Yes, exactly. That does so much more heavy lifting. And they can do the same thing with the visual descriptions. The text has this staccato list, the tiles, the clothing, the architecture, the books, the stillness. Nothing is random.
Yeah, it's dramatic, but it lacks analytical weight.
Right. So combine it into a single academically rigorous observation. Say something like, Hamdi Bey's meticulous inclusion of specific material culture, ranging from architectural tiles to scholarly texts, was a deliberate choice to convey intellectual presence rather than exotic fantasy.
That's so much stronger. But moving on to the actual historical argument, the interpretation of the artwork as a direct rejection of outsider perspectives is a strong foundation, yet it risks oversimplifying the complex historical consensus regarding 19th century art.
This is a huge historiographical blind spot. The weakness is that the narrative presents a strict binary between the, quote-unquote, outsiders who painted the East as exotic and Osman Hamdi Bey, who, quote, changed everything.
Yeah, the changed everything line is a bit much.
It ignores the nuanced art historical consensus that artists like Hamdi Bey were often in deep dialogue with those very outside influences. He was utilizing and adapting Western techniques to redefine Ottoman identity from within.
Right, he trained in Paris under Jérôme, who was, the quintessential French Orientalist.
Exactly. So the suggestion for the author is to introduce nuance into the historical analysis by acknowledging that his work is not merely a rejection of fantasy. It's a sophisticated, complex negotiation between Ottoman tradition and external artistic conventions.
Well, and the text says he, quote, rebuilt identity through art. Doesn't that place just way too much historical burden on a single artist without acknowledging the broader ecosystem of art history?
Oh, absolutely. It's classic great man history, which history professors generally push back on. For a concrete example of how to fix this, when discussing works like The Young Scholar, the author should avoid framing it as a complete break from outsider art.
So what should they do instead?
They need to discuss how he utilized the visual language of his era to subvert stereotypes internally. He was using the colonizer's visual vocabulary with a totally different accent, basically.
Oh, I see.
And they really need to revise that absolute statement, Osman Hamdi Bey changed everything, to something more analytically precise.
Like, Osman Hamdi Bey challenged prevailing external narratives by inserting authentic Muslim intellectual life into a genre previously dominated by outsider exoticism.
Perfect. That is a targeted, verifiable claim.
Okay, so pivoting to his most famous piece, the metaphor of the Tortoise Trainer, representing slow societal change, is visually captivating, but the analysis lacks the specific historical contextualization necessary to anchor this claim in 19th century realities.
Yeah, this gap is what separates an art blog from a university history paper. The weakness is that the text asserts the trainer reflects the struggle to educate, reform, and awaken a society moving too slowly, but it just stops at the metaphor.
Right, it doesn't go any further.
No, it completely omits the concrete details of the 19th century social reforms that Hamdi Bey was actively participating in as a museum founder and a revolutionary archaeologist.
The author relies a lot on just the emotional resonance. They use the phrase, slow, heavy, almost frustrating. But how can a history student effectively use an artist's subjective frustration as objective historical evidence of a society's reform pace?
You really can't. You can't use vibes as primary source evidence in a history seminar. So the suggestion here is to ground the artistic metaphor in the concrete historical reality of the era, by explicitly linking his visual representations of patience and struggle to the specific institutional reforms of the late Ottoman Empire.
Okay, so making that actionable, the first concrete example would be to expand on the line, trying to educate, reform, and awaken society. They need to explicitly name the types of 19th century modernization efforts he was involved in.
Yes, explain what specific reforms the society was moving too slowly to adopt. And another concrete example is to connect his role as a museum founder directly to his paintings.
Because he wasn't just a guy with a paintbrush, right? He was a state official.
Exactly. The author needs to explain how establishing museums and painting dignified Ottoman subjects, like the thinkers and readers they mentioned, were dual strategies in the exact same sociopolitical reform movement.
Yeah, linking the day job to the canvas. That makes the analysis so much stronger. But let's look at how the whole piece wraps up. The thematic progression jumps abruptly from analyzing visual details to making sweeping philosophical statements, missing the analytical connective tissue required to prove its modern relevance.
Yeah, the structure kind of breaks down at the end. The weakness here is the transition from examining specific visual elements, like when they say, in the Tortoise Trainer, even patience becomes a metaphor, directly into these broad conclusions like, and that's why his work still feels modern today.
It just skips the why.
Exactly. It skips the crucial logical step of explaining why this specific historical struggle resonates with contemporary audiences.
I actually want to push back gently on the phrase the author uses right there, where they say, it makes you pause and think.
Oh yeah, that line.
It's a nice sentiment, but an academic paper needs to explicitly state what the reader should be thinking about regarding modern relevance, right? You can't just tell them to think.
Right, you can't outsource the argument to the reader. So the suggestion is to build a logical bridge that explicitly connects the historical visual evidence to its enduring societal impact. The text has to demonstrate exactly how 19th century questions of representation map onto modern historical relevance.
So how do they build that bridge in practice?
Well, for a concrete example, before concluding that the work feels modern today, they should insert a section explaining that the modern struggle over who gets to tell our story is a direct continuation of Hamdi Bey's fight against being reduced to symbols and stereotypes.
Oh, connecting it directly to modern post-colonial discourse.
Yes, and as a final example, they need to replace the vague conversational conclusion. Right now it says, follow for more forgotten artists with a theater mask emoji.
Yeah, which kills the academic vibe immediately.
It really does. They should replace that with a robust academic summary that ties the physical stillness in his paintings back to the ongoing, highly relevant discourse surrounding cultural self-representation.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Just to quickly recap our 4 primary actionable takeaways for the author. First, elevate the fragmented script into a cohesive academic tone.
Right. Ditch the short-form video pacing.
Exactly. Second, introduce nuance into the binary view of insider versus outsider art by looking at his actual dialogue with Western conventions.
Crucial for an art history analysis.
Third, ground those visual metaphors in concrete 19th century reform movements rather than just relying on the subjective frustration of the painting. And finally, build a logical bridge to explicitly define the text's modern relevance.
We'd love to see the author apply these structural and thematic changes, so please do submit your revised work back to the critique for further review.
The core ideas are fantastic, it just needs that academic scaffolding.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.